Welcome to NewsHour from the BBC World Service. Hello, I'm James Menendez. Coming up, there have been some of the biggest rallies so far against the military coup in Myanmar, with workers downing tools and drivers using their cars to block roads. One young protester in Mandalay tells us why he's taking part.
If we don't go out on the street, there's no really hope for the democracy in this country.
Also today, will NATO members delay the withdrawal of their troops from Afghanistan? Many Afghans see the violence only getting worse.
For the time being, yes, we have lost the hope for the peace, but we are willing and we look forward.
And we'll meet the running club in the US, try to stop some parts of town being no-go areas for minorities.
The fact is, running as a minority in a neighborhood that's not black and brown is where the danger is.
All of that and more coming up after the news.
Hello, this is Julie Candler with the BBC News. Myanmar has seen some of its biggest protests yet against the military coup that deposed the civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi earlier this month. Hundreds of thousands of people gathered across the country as a campaign of civil disobedience continued. Jonathan Head reports.
Drivers in Yangon staged a breakdown protest, leaving their cars, bonnets raised, to block roads into the city and stop people trying to get to work, and any army or police vehicles too. The loosely organised civil disobedience movement is trying to cripple the functions of government with its boycott. Civil servants, teachers, bankers and even the Seamen's Union joined today's protest, hoping to undermine the new regime's legitimacy.
South Africa has started its vaccination campaign against the coronavirus. It's using the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the first country in the world to do so. So far, it's the only vaccine that requires just one shot. President Cyril Ramaphosa posted a photo of him receiving one of the first jabs. South Africa had been due to start the rollout last week, but was delayed due to concerns over the effectiveness of another vaccine against a new coronavirus variant. Britain is to become the first country in the world to allow volunteers to be deliberately exposed to coronavirus to advance medical research into the pandemic. The trial is due to begin in the next few weeks. Here's our health correspondent, Catherine da Costa.
In this initial study, around 90 young, healthy volunteers will be recruited to spend 2 weeks at the Royal Free Hospital in London. They'll be exposed to a small amount of COVID to find the lowest possible dose required to cause an infection. Then they'll be closely monitored 24 hours a day and regularly checked over a year. Volunteers aren't paid, but they are compensated for their time. The study will help scientists to learn more about how the virus infects people and passes between us. Longer term, they hope to establish which vaccines and treatments work best in defeating new variants of the virus.
Italy's new Prime Minister, Mario Draghi, has put plans to ramp up coronavirus vaccinations at the top of the policy programme he outlined to the Senate ahead of a confidence vote this week. Mark Lowen reports from Rome.
This was a broad and ambitious vision by Mario Draghi, but also a daunting list of the challenges Italy faces. Comparing it to reconstruction after the Second World War, he talked both of possibility and responsibility, the need to reform public administration and taxation, to invest in research, digitalization, education and renewable energy, and to improve opportunities both for women and young people. He spoke first, though, of coronavirus, pledging to ramp up vaccinations and do everything possible to combat the pandemic.
World News from the BBC. Politicians who want independence for the French South Pacific territory of New Caledonia have taken the majority of seats in the government for the first time. The island's assembly voted to give 6 of the 11 posts to pro-independence candidates. Under a deal with France signed in 1998, the territory will hold a third and final referendum on independence next year. The man portrayed as a hero in a Hollywood movie about the Rwandan genocide, Hotel Rwanda, has appeared in court for the start of his trial. Paul Rusesabagina is facing terrorism charges. His lawyers have in the past denied the charges. Leila Nathu reports.
Wearing regulation pink prison uniform along with 20 other defendants, Paul Rusesabagina appeared in a Kigali courtroom where he faced a string of serious charges, including terrorism and murder. He rose to prominence after the Hollywood film Hotel Rwanda portrayed him as a hero who risked his life to shelter hundreds of people fleeing violence during the genocide. After moving to Belgium and later the US, he became a fierce critic of the Rwandan government and in 2017 co-founded the Rwandan Movement for Democratic Change, an opposition party based abroad. He's accused of involvement in its armed wing.
Rights groups have condemned the deportation of a British journalist from Mozambique. Tom Bowker is a founder and editor of the independent website Zitamar News. It had reported extensively on the jihadist insurgency in the north of Mozambique, despite government efforts to severely limit coverage of the escalating war. Mr. Bowker was banned from entering the country for 10 years, a decision he called politically motivated. At the Australian Open Tennis Championship, Rafael Nadal's hopes of becoming the leading tennis Grand Slam winner of all time have been put on hold after the world's number 2 player was knocked out in the quarter-finals. The Greek fifth seed, Stefanos Tsitsipas, came from 2 sets down to win in Melbourne. BBC News.
Hello and welcome to News Hour from the BBC World Service. We're coming to you live from London. I'm James Menendez. And we're going to begin the programme in Myanmar because today has seen some of the biggest protests so far against the military coup 2 weeks ago and the detention of the country's de facto leader, Aung San Suu Kyi of the National League for Democracy. Her trial on flimsy charges began unexpectedly on Tuesday. So rushed, in fact, that Ms Suu Kyi's own lawyer didn't know it was happening. Well, that and the military's declaration that only a minority supported the demonstrations seems to have encouraged more and more people to take action. Well, here's the sound of one crowd in the main city, Yangon, singing their support for Aung San Suu Kyi. Well, Nguyen Chan A is from the BBC's Burmese service. He's in Yangon and has spent the day out on the streets.
So far, we see one of the largest protests here after elected leader Aung San Suu Kyi faced another charge, and also the military press conference yesterday. So all these 2 events drew more people come out into the streets of Yangon as well as other major cities of the country. Today, we also see a lot of cars in the streets and they are trying to block the main streets in the city of Yangon. It's one of the new techniques now protesters are using. They try to block the streets to prevent the security forces coming to the protesters. Another thing is they also try to stop the workers, the government staff, going to their workplace.
Is this part of the campaign of civil disobedience then? And is the aim to just try and paralyse as much of life in Myanmar as possible?
It's a part of the campaign. It's a new one because all the protesters and activists asked all the government staff to stop working under the new military government. And so this is a second week already. Most of the government agencies are almost shut down, and all the private bank sectors are shut down. And then so one of the leaders of this movement spoke to us, and then he said this movement is successful so far, at least 80% successful. So that is why the military told press yesterday is that they are being patient with those protesters, but they will take action soon. They didn't mention about the time, but they will say that they are just being patient at the moment, but they will take action soon. Today, so far, even though we see people all over the city, but we still don't see much of the violence. And also we still don't see like the heavy military presence in the city, just normal police patrolling.
What are people expecting will come out of these protests?
Today, they come out again because the first thing they said is that they are really upset to see Aung San Suu Kyi is facing another ridiculous charge related with the violation of the COVID restrictions. So when we talked to them, and then the first thing they said is all those charges are like laughable, But they know that what they can do only is to come out on the streets and demand for the release of the elected leaders. And they are also relying on the international pressure as well. So that is why we see the bigger crowds in front of the U.S. Embassy as well as the UN office in Yangon as well. At the same time, they clearly reject the military rule.
And just paint a little more of a picture of what the protests look like, what people are wearing, what flags they're waving, what banners they're holding up for us.
Very colorful. We see a lot of young people in it. And then also they are using like the social media messages. Another thing we mainly see is like the calling out for the international to save Myanmar. So we see a lot of Save Myanmar banners and also asking for the serious action against the military junta.
So are lots of the banners in English then? Are people writing messages in English in the expectation that people abroad will see them?
Yes, because young people are at the heart of this protest, They are not like the older generation. English language is common language for them, and also they are expressing their desire to the world.
Nguyen Chan A of the BBC's Burmese service speaking to me from Yangon. Well, let's head north several hundred kilometres to Myanmar's second city, Mandalay, and hear from someone who's been taking part in the protests there today. A young man who doesn't want us to use his name on air because of the possible consequences of speaking out.
We march to protest. We gather hundreds of thousands of students from other universities and colleges, and we march together.
And what sort of slogans have you been shouting?
We shout to release our leaders, Daw San Suu Kyi and Mr. President, and other political leaders from National League for Democracy. And also we shout for the government employees to participate in the civil disobedience movement. And also we shouted for that we want democracy, not military government.
And did you see many military vehicles on the streets, many soldiers today?
Not really, no.
And why do you think that is? Why are there not many soldiers out?
I have no idea. I mean, maybe they'll use barricades and soldiers to stop the protest.
And what do you think is what's been planned for the rest of the week? Is there going to be a strike tomorrow?
Yeah, there'll be a big strike tomorrow, a much bigger strike than today.
And what do people think will come out of these protests? I mean, are they really expecting the military to give up after the coup and return the country to civilian government?
I guess if we keep pressuring them like this, we may succeed. Because a lot of government workers are now participating in the civil disobedience movement. All of the private banks are closed now. Only government banks run in Mandalay and Yangon. So all of the other banks are closed now because there are no workers there. A lot of workers, government workers are participating in the civil disobedience movement. So I think we may succeed.
The alternative, of course, is if the military decide to take action. How worried are you that there may be a military crackdown on the protests?
That can happen. That can happen anytime. That can happen tomorrow. But we can just stay at home and hope for the military to return the power to the civil government. We can all hope that the international community will do something to return the power to the civil government. So we have to take the risks and we have to go out and protest. We will show every day that we do not want this military government.
Can I ask you how old you are?
I am 25 now.
So you're still young. Are you scared, though, about what might happen and what might happen on the streets?
I am scared. Actually, a few days ago, our marching, we faced a barricade a few days ago, and they used, tear gas and water cannon, and I was scared at there, but I tell myself that I have to do this because if we don't lead this community, if we don't lead this people, if we don't go out on the street, there's no hope. There's no really hope for the democracy in this country. We're fighting for our future.
One of the protesters, a young man, one of those taking part in the rallies today and in the previous few days, speaking to us from Mandalay, that's Myanmar's second city. Now, Paul Rusesabagina was portrayed as a hero in a Hollywood film for saving the lives of hundreds of Hutu and Tutsi refugees during the 1994 Rwandan genocide. But today the former hotel manager has gone on trial in the Rwandan capital Kigali, where he faces a string of serious charges, including terrorism and murder. Our Africa correspondent Leila Nathu reports on the background to the case.
United Artists presents the true story of a man who fought impossible odds.
I cannot leave these people to die.
To save everyone he could.
They say you led the massacres. You will tell them the truth. I will tell them nothing unless you help me.
It was sold as a tale of bravery, sacrifice and heroism as ethnic Hutu extremists began their campaign of slaughter in Rwanda in 1994. A decade later, the story of Paul Rusesabagina, the manager of the Hotel Mille Collines in Kigali, was the inspiration behind the film Hotel Rwanda, about how he sheltered hundreds of people fleeing violence.
Quand je suis arrivé à Kigali, déjà,
he found international fame, and though some of his critics claim he exaggerated his role, in 2007 he told reporters about what he'd done during the genocide.
souvent les gens me posent la question et me disent mais Paul,
people often ask me, Paul, how did you decide to risk your life to save others? I simply tell them that I never took a decision. I saw people come to my house, and when people came to my house, I didn't have the heart to abandon them and leave, to be evacuated on my own.
de les laisser chez moi et de partir, d'être évacué tout seul.
Having left Rwanda in 1996, he became a Belgian citizen and later moved to the US. But the film gave him a platform to criticise Rwanda's President Kagame. He's been in government since 1994, winning international praise for helping the country turn around, but has also been accused of cracking down on political opponents. The circumstances surrounding Paul Rusesabagina's arrest in August last year are still unclear. Rwandan officials claimed he was detained under an international warrant for leading terrorist movements, but that's something his family disputes.
So my name is Anais Kamemba. I'm Paul's daughter. This is not a real trial. This is a sham trial. My father was kidnapped from Dubai to Rwanda. He was not allowed to have any counsel of his choosing for the first 70 days. He has been denied a legal international lawyer, which is allowed in Rwanda. He has been denied confiscated his case file. So he hasn't seen what he's being accused of.
In an earlier court hearing in Kigali, dressed in a regulation pink prison outfit and face mask, Mr. Rusesabagina admitted to forming an armed wing of the Rwandan Movement for Democratic Change, an opposition party based abroad, which he co-founded in 2017. I asked his daughter Anais about that appearance. What do you say to that admission that he made, even though he said that his role was only one of diplomacy, the fact that he admitted being involved in the founding of that group? Do you feel that that's incriminating?
Well, everything that my father says during the pre-trial motion, I don't believe it, and because he said these things with lawyers who he did not choose. He said these things under duress, and if you have seen some of the early indictment of what they've talked about him, what they're accusing him with the charges are accusation of what he confessed under torture.
Last week, the European Parliament condemned what it described as Paul Rusesabagina's enforced disappearance, illegal rendition and detention. While Rwanda's parliament insists their justice system is independent, his family believe the outcome of the trial is already determined and that international pressure is his best hope.
And that was the BBC's Leila Nathu reporting there on the trial of Paul Rusesabagina in Kigali, the Rwandan capital, on those serious charges. Do stay with us. We're going to be heading to Nigeria in a couple of minutes' time. We're going to be hearing about another kidnapping of school children in the country. That's coming up, as I say, in just a couple of minutes' time. You're listening to News Hour from the BBC. Also coming up on the programme, a year on from the murder of an unarmed black jogger in the US, we hear how one group is trying to change people's perceptions.
It's not safe for black people to run if every time we're running we're perceived as a threat. it's important for us to change that narrative that if someone of color is running, they're typically either running away from the cops or they're running away from a scene of a crime or they're running to attack someone. And that's just something that's been ingrained in our minds. It's not just something that white people think, it's also something that black people think, which shows you how ingrained it is.
That report from Boston in the US coming up in about 20 minutes' time. Let's just recap our main headline from the newsroom this hour. Huge crowds of protesters have converged in the centre of Myanmar's biggest city, Yangon, for what the organisers believe is the biggest demonstration yet against the military coup. This is James Menendez with NewsHour live from the BBC. Well, let's head to Nigeria now, where there's been another kidnapping of school children, this time boys at a boarding school in Kagara town in Niger State. You may remember that at the end of last year, more than 300 schoolboys in northern Katsina State were abducted by gunmen and only released after several days of negotiations. Let's talk to the BBC's Ishaq Khalid, who's on the line from the Nigerian capital, Abuja. Ishaq, what more do we know about the attack? How many people were taken?
Well, basically what we know so far from the state government is that 42 people have been abducted, including 27 students, 3 members of staff, and 12 families of the abducted staff. So the gunmen...
Ishaq, are you still there? I think we've lost the line to Ishaq Khalid. We'll try and re-establish that and come back to him as soon as we can. But let's move on for the moment. If you're under COVID lockdown and feeling a bit cooped up at home, do spare a thought for the crew of the tanker Iba, now stranded on a sandbank just off the coast of the United Arab Emirates. There are 5 of them on board from India, Pakistan and Myanmar. And until this week, 2 hadn't set foot on dry land for more than 3.5 years. The most recent arrivals have been stuck on board for nearly a year and a half. They were abandoned when the tanker's owner hit financial problems and stopped paying their wages about 3 years ago. Now, though, it looks like they are finally going home to their families with most of the money they're owed after the tanker was bought by a new company. I've been talking to Mohammed Arashedi, who covers the Arab world and Iran for the International Transport Workers Federation. First, his reaction to this resolution.
This was really a good news because particularly this ship is one of the notorious cases we had in the ITF, in the International Transport Workers Federation. It was a case of severe abandonment. Really a notorious case. Iba is one of the ships that were abandoned belonging to the to Alco Shipping that suffered a fleet abandonment. In the case of Iba, truly it was a good news and good relief for the families and for all the people and organizations that were fighting and assisting them during all this time.
How have the crew been surviving for so long?
So the crew was surviving mainly to assistance from the Seafarer Center in Dubai, from the ITF, from the local authorities as well. They survived as they could, as we say. It was very long time, which is absolutely, of course, unacceptable. If there is a commercial conflict, if there is a problem for the owner of the manager of the ship, that the seafarers find themselves stranded and stuck and blocked on board of a ship without wages, without salaries, and without being able to go home.
And why couldn't they leave? Is the point that if they left the ship, they wouldn't get their unpaid wages? Is that it?
Well, of course, because when it comes to flag of convenience, you know, that the owners is from one nationality, the management is established in one country, the flag on board of the ship is different, the crew who has the employment contracts with the crew is from a third and the fourth different country with different nationalities, and this is always make it more difficult to pursue the claim. So when the crew or the seafarers are on board of one ship, they have more chance to get something if they remain on board, because if they leave the vessel, they have absolutely less chances to get paid anything, because they will be totally at the mercy of the good intentions of the owners.
And if they're not getting paid, that means that their families back home are also presumably suffering too. They're not getting any money sent back.
Many of the seafarers, rightly, as you said, are the only income at home. You have families who are sick at home. You have children who are losing their schools because there is no money. The only income at home is stranded on board of a ship far away from the country, and they are not even able to pay to cover the costs of their daily basic needs, taking into account that the ships are moving 90% of all the goods in the world, and they should be treated really, really much better than they are.
How common is this situation where a shipping company goes bust and people are left stranded on board? Does it happen quite a lot?
Unfortunately, at least in the region where I am, the numbers are increasing. We have cases in Lebanon of abandonment. We have cases of abandoned seafarers in Libya. We've got cases of abandonment in Kuwait, in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia, in the Emirates. The abandonment is the cancer of the maritime industry that should be eradicated, indeed.
That was Mohammed Arashedi of the International Transport Workers Federation. Let's go back to what happened in Nigeria, that kidnapping of school children in Niger State. We can rejoin the BBC's Ishaq Khalid, who's in the Nigerian capital, Abuja. And Ishaq, you were just telling us, giving us a few more details about what happened during this attack.
Well, basically what happened was that 42 people have been abducted, according to the state governor, including 27 students, 3 members of staff, and 12 families of the abducted staff. And the gunmen stormed the school in the early hours of Wednesday, roughly around 1 a.m. local time. In military-like uniform, they opened fire, and they killed 1 student. They shot him dead, and also abducted a number of others. So the school has now been closed, and the government in Niger State has ordered all schools in 4 areas of the state to be closed because of the insecurity, because of the vulnerability to attacks. And Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari has ordered the security forces to pursue the abductors and rescue the abductees. He described the attack as barbaric as well as cowardly.
Who did it?
Well, it's not clear who actually is behind the kidnapping, but Niger State is one of several states in Nigeria that are battling issues with armed criminal gangs who kidnap people for ransom and also attack communities to kill civilians. So many people are pointing to these armed criminal gangs. The country is facing various insecurity problems, of course. The Boko Haram insurgency in the northeast of the country, but many feel these criminal gangs are not largely linked to the Boko Haram insurgency.
Given how often this seems to happen, and as you say, it does happen in Niger State, among other places, I mean, do these schools not have guards, for example?
Well, basically, some of these schools have guards, but the security provisions around schools in Nigeria are generally inadequate. In some places, you find that 1 or 2 guards are there. Some of them are not even armed. So in this instance, the gunmen overpowered the security guards in the school, and they then moved into the dormitories where the students were asleep, and they broke some of the doors open and opened fire as well. So the calls for school to be provided with security have been on for many years because there have been attacks on schools in the past. You remember in 2014, more than 200 schoolgirls were abducted in Chibok. That was by Boko Haram. Then just in December, armed criminal gangs abducted more than 300 students in Katsina State, the president's home state. The students then were released following negotiations. So there are a lot of security issues, and many are saying that not only schools, are being targeted by communities. So Nigerians are worried, very worried, and pressure is increasing on the Nigerian government to do more to ensure that the security situation is brought under control. But it seems the hands of the authorities are very full with the armed groups' activities across the country.
Yeah, okay. Ishaq, thank you very much indeed for that update. That was the BBC's Ishaq Khalid joining us from Abuja, the Nigerian capital. Do head to our website, bbc.com/news. There's more on the background to these sorts of attacks, including a link to a documentary from a year or so ago about the rise in armed gangs targeting school children for ransom. You're listening to News Hour. Do stay with us. Much more to come in the next half hour.
This is the BBC World Service, getting inside the brain of one of the richest people on the planet.
What does it take to earn thousands every single second and amass an estimated fortune of nearly $200 billion?
In some ways, it seems like Jeff was born with a customer gene.
Jeff Bezos is the founder of the world's largest online retailer.
Satisfying customers. That strategy is good for making money.
He can kind of peer into the future and force new things.
Embrace innovation, embrace experimentation, and accept that many of the things you try won't work.
From books to food, from cloud computing to space exploration.
If the world economy and population is to keep expanding, space is the only way to go.
I'm David Baker, and I'll be finding out the secrets of his success.
Inside the brain of Jeff Bezos at bbcworldservice.com/documentaries.
Coming up on NewsAir in the next 30 minutes, we'll be hearing live from the Afghan capital Kabul about the prospects for peace as NATO members debate whether to go ahead with the planned withdrawal of troops. Also from Boston in the US about ensuring the city's streets are safe for runners from minorities. And a former minister falls foul of India's Me Too movement. All that's coming up after the news.